Nightmare on Elm Street was a title that we always wanted to be involved with. I think for Michael, Drew, and myself, it's kind of the jewel in the horror crown. It was a title that we were pursuing for a long time, and even after the success of Friday the 13th, we still were not able to lock it down, and it took a lot of convincing.
We started the begging process for Nightmare on Elm Street, which is, a movie I grew up on and scared the hell out of me as a child.
Absolutely, Freddy Krueger is a big part of what made those films successful. But the other thing that was so exciting for us about this movie is the concept of if you sleep, you die is as clear a concept as you can have. And growing up, I always thought if I died in my dreams that I would actually die. And that didn't come from hearing it on the news. That came from the Nightmare on Elm Street movies.
I think true horror is psychological. And so there's a tone that we're trying to reach with this. It's like, yeah, Freddy is a scary son of a bitch, but it's the feeling and it's the vibe of, can somebody actually kill you in your dreams? And if I can make people believe that, then I think we've succeeded.
In the screenplay, the movie opened at a party scene at Dean's house, where we brought all of our leads together and introduced the characters in a 7-minute sequence. It all took place at the house with Dean dying at the end at the party. We shot the scene, cut the movie together, and after showing the movie to an audience and really watching it closely, we figured that it was the wrong tone for the movie to open at a big, fun party scene. Something that we had always battled with was, when do you show Freddy Krueger in this movie? How early is too early, and should we open with a nightmare? In the original development of the movie, we decided to not open with a nightmare, and we decided to hold Freddy back. But I think after watching the movie and, seeing it with an audience, we realized, you know what, let's open with a nightmare. Let's set the tone right off the bat on what you're here to see. You open with a nightmare, Freddy Krueger's in the movie, 30 seconds into this movie, and this is what you're here for. When we were shooting the party scene, everything felt great. We have a great stunt where Dean goes over the balcony through a glass atrium, the glass cutting him to shreds. It all seemed to be working great. And in the screenplay, it felt like it was working great when you read it. So we didn't know until the movie was put together and you watch it as a whole, and you realize, we're not starting this movie the right way. The first 6 minutes of the movie is the entire setup. And we sat down with the studio and everyone agreed, you know what, let's open this movie in a nightmare. Let's open with Dean in a nightmare. Where are we gonna do that? We just start batting ideas around, and we end up in the Springwood Diner. What a great location. And then we take Nancy, who we give her a job. She's the waitress at the diner, and then you start building the sequence, and now you have this in the movie. I'll tell you, Kellen Lutz, when he heard we were redoing the opening, he decided not to go to sleep for a couple of days because he knew this was his sequence and he was gonna die at the end, and he had to be tired. And let me tell you, he brought it. And it was an amazing thing.
In working on this and trying to develop this character, Sam first sent me a copy of Nosferatu and a bunch of information on serial killers. So, I watched that old vampire movie. It was just a great thing to watch. And then I started really poking through and learning about serial killers. And I started to kind of go down this very serious road with Freddy in terms of the research. And I started to key into Ed Kemper. And as I was doing this research, I ended up on this on the website telling me that, wow, they made a movie on Ed Kemper. So I went to YouTube, looked it up, and I found the trailer to this movie, and it was a slasher movie, and it pissed me off. And that's when I realized I'm not playing a serial killer, and I didn't need to go to that depth of research with this character. So I immediately kind of pulled back, and I started to focus on the boogeyman aspect of this guy. And in terms of what made this guy tick, and the boogeyman aspect, that's where I'm kind of coming from. Trying to be true to who Freddy Krueger is, trying to be true to that boogeyman aspect, but yet still bring a little bit of reality and realism to his backstory and what turned him into this. So it's kind of this cool little hybrid, but it was very freeing for me when I realized, man, we're playing a boogeyman. This is the guy he's your worst nightmare. He's the guy that he's the main point of focus in a campfire story. And that to me is what Nightmare on Elm Street is.
There are things about Freddy Krueger that are iconic that you have to address right off the bat. You gotta address his hand, you gotta address the sweater, and you have to address his face and the fedora, really. When you start this process, you wanna make it your own. So you go in a lot of different directions and investigate them. I mean, we had a lot of bad ideas that I don't want to tell you about, but we never put him in a cowboy hat and boots.
There was a lot of shredding involved in some of the earlier drawings, but we realized that it would require a T-shirt underneath, and concerns about prosthetics and stuff. And it wasn't just this. It becomes a homeless guy, so we changed it from that. And we were going to do things, and like do different things, images or something maybe on the inside. Maybe it would be more. Again, it would be like the. Some of the nightmares would be inside the jacket. We were gonna, get really into it. We're, lighting up the greens, and these are color stripes that we're looking at. This is sort of like an overcoat. And, up here, because this was, different, for fabrics, there's swatches and textures, and we, tried to have stuff that had a little more texture to it, which I think mostly in the past, a lot of it was really flat. So we did want to exaggerate it at one time, which would have been more of this kind of stuff, which was this was going to be this red leather that's been modeled up here, coat, that would have had burn marks and everything in it. And I just put the green and red stripe at that point because we hadn't gotten into it, but I was going to do, there's going to be different images back here in the coat. And that was more the Nosferatu type of look. And, he would have the coat maybe on just for a little bit, And this is just an idea. This is the lining of the coat. These were skulls, but that's just to give him an idea of what we could do, and then we were going to dye it colors. So, and we had the gray hat, which originally was the hat that they had wanted, was a gray hat, and then we ended up switching it at the last minute.
Doing the prosthetics took about 2 hours, and it was just really cool. It was my first slicing of the throat prosthetic that I got to wear, so it's kind of cool just doing it. We had great FX guys, and they really talked to us all. Let's do this right. We only have like 1 or 2 takes with this, and this is what has to happen. So with great communication, we were able to nail the scene. And for myself, I love doing stunts. I know this isn't a crazy stunt, but envisioning a knife there, without the blade, they're gonna have the real knife blade CGI'd or put back in there. So it's just hitting yourself, and it's just for the effects. And when you feel it, it kind of helps as an actor. When you're doing it, you get that surprise, like, shit, that hurt feeling.
Sam and Andrew Clement really got into the logistics of what happens to a real burn victim, and then started concepting from there. I remember seeing the first series of them, and it made me think English Patient, you know, where he's totally, like, his whole head is melted together. And it was a great place to start, but you realize, like, wow, that's crazy. That's what a real burn victim looks like, and that's frightening. But at the same time, we wanted to bring it to a place where he could use his features. Still look like somebody who had actually been burnt in reality, and somebody who could actually use their face. So it definitely went through a bunch of series of different concepts, including where Freddy didn't have a good portion of his nose. You know what I mean? It was almost like we were going to comp in an area that was, you could see into his skull, which was really crazy. But Sam just decided that once we got that thing on, even with the tip of the nose, it really brought stronger features to his face. And it made that part scarier. You didn't want everybody to just be looking at the nose the entire time. It worked out so well once we did put that prosthetic on, and you could really see how burnt he really was and how scary he really was, and he'd be able to use his features and face and really get in there and scrunch up his face and really scare you with it. That was exactly what we were looking for, is like a hybrid of a real burn victim and a character who you could really see what he was thinking through his face.
Well, we've got a couple designs down here. This is actually one of the earlier designs that we had done, which is still really very much Jackie. He has burns all over his face. We actually wound up using this for the reshoots. We actually have a scene where Jackie is in the middle of being burned. So I threw some hair on it really quickly, and you can see that it's somebody, you can see that it's on its way to becoming Freddy, but it's not quite Freddy just yet. So wound up actually serving double duty. This is actually the final approved design that we had done for the film, and you can see a lot of the designs that are echoed actually in the finished makeup right here. And this is one of the first applications that we had done. This is one of the test applications. He doesn't have any kind of digital nose removal right here, but you can see that I took a photograph from the same day, and I actually digitally took out the nose myself. So we could sort of get a feel for what that would look like with a digital alteration. I don't have you can't see the cheek, but that was presumably going to be done as well. Here are some of the scars that we had done. We had done everything from these very, very delicate little welts. These are little transfer appliances with paint on top of them, and you can see that they just give a little highlight to the skin, like Freddy's just grazed somebody, all the way up to these really deep gashes that have a lot of dimensionality to them, and they can actually be made to bleed. As soon as I heard that Jackie was involved, I said, that's the guy. From a makeup standpoint, I knew he had just a terrific face for it.
This is the burn classroom, and there's another classroom adjacent to it, which you can't see from where you are, which is the water, what we're calling the water classroom. And during the film, one of the earliest scenes, the character Chris is in her high school, and while the lesson's going on, she falls asleep. And then when she reawakes, she's in the burn classroom, which obviously gives her quite a shock. The teacher's replaced by Freddy, so to try and escape him, she exits out of the classroom thinking she's going to get to some kind of safety, But when she opens the door, she realizes she's actually in a mirror version of this classroom.
I think Patrick had a lot of fun with the whole nightmare aspect of things because almost every environment has to have a couple of different versions.
While we're in the design phase of the film, I thought it'd be more interesting rather than it just being another classroom, the same classroom. It might be more interesting to change the element so it's a water classroom. Obviously, it's not practical to do a set like this on a real location because you would have to burn it and it takes a lot of time. This is nearly all paint. It's all paint effects on the furniture, it's all paint effects on the wall. Some of the dressing is burnt, like the maps have been burnt, but everything else is all paint. The set where I'm standing in is actually elevated because the set next door, as I mentioned before, is a water classroom. It's actually waterlogged. There's about 4 inches of water in there, so she goes from a burnt classroom to a wet classroom. So we needed that practically to be able to have the water in there. Right now it's inactive. Special effects have rigged water, so there's be a whole dripping thing going on when we're actually in here. It's a pond liner, an oversized pond liner, literally put in there. So we kind of figure it out before you build it, the engineering of it, and then build over the top of it so it looks as though it's seamless.
And the way Patrick designed these sets, every time we'd kind of walk into an environment, it was like, wow, like we're standing in Nightmare on Elm Street.
For the water classroom, there's a brilliant book which is unfortunately taking all the photographs from the flood in New Orleans, which has a fantastic reference. And this is some research, but it's kind of, this whole scene is a dream sequence, so it's kind of based in reality. It's kind of, in reality, these walls would not cinder so much. It would probably be more smoke damage, but because it is a film and it's a nightmare, we can take liberties with that. So we've made it look more like it is now.
They've built these incredible sets that really are sort of these warped, twisted versions of the reality room that we're in when we have, and they're just stunning. Like I was in there going like, can I shoot a music video in here real quick while you're not noticing, because these sets are amazing.
There's some quite strange drawings on the wall, which are kind of a surprise. It's trying to have the same balance again, so it's things that look almost ordinary, but at the same time are quite scary. But what we did is we took the art that's in the original classroom, which was done by various members of the crew to look like they're done by kids. And again, it has that weird, scary edge. So when you first look at them, they just look like drawings that you'd find in a regular classroom, but then on closer inspection, you kind of see there's something a little bit strange about them. So we copied those 3 times, so they're in all 3 classrooms. And then in here, you can see on the chalkboard and on some of the blackboards, we've just added some over the top, and that was me. The fun thing about this is it's recreating the same set 3 times. So one, you've got the original set, which is the classroom in the normal reality, daytime, and then we go to the burnt classroom, then we have the water classroom, so you get a chance to play with the differences between them. This was actually one of the first sets that came up. When I first got the script, just reading through the script, trying to come up with things to make the film visually interesting and push the story along, and this was one of the ones that came up first. So we did some conceptual drawings of it and showed them to Sam, and he was really excited about it. And then I actually went through the budgetary development part of the process, and it seemed at one point it was going to be too expensive to do it. But then fortunately, one of the producers on the film, Michael Bay, decided that he really liked the set, so from the illustrations, so which gave us enough, helped me persuade the powers that be to give me some more money so we could afford to build it.
Originally we were going to have Chris in some kind of nightgown type thing, and then because of the stunt that she had to go through, Katie Cassidy, it had to be something a little more involved. So to cover up harnesses and everything else, I thought Johnny Depp. And I don't know who's going to get it, where they'll get it, but Johnny Depp made his career, Nightmare on Elm Street, and he had the fabulous cut-off football 10 jersey on. So we redid our modern version of it for Katie Cassidy.
Well, I give that to the costume designer, Marianne Chio. I showed up one day and the number 10 jersey was on, and I just kind of smiled, and it's one of those moments where you just say thank you.
We've worked with Marianne on a lot of movies. She gets the drill, and she takes her job very seriously. And she takes her job so seriously that sometimes I think she'll be doing things that she's the only person who knows that she's doing them. There are Springwood High
Letterman jackets all over this movie. I own one. I love my Letterman jacket.
Everybody loves these. You know, it was one of those things that I did thinking, you know, oh, it's going to be too much, and you know, but they'd originally lost their location and they'd lost the color. They had these colored things. They said, what can you do to bring color into the school? And I was like, the Letterman jacket, and it became put it in every shot jacket because it's just gorgeous. It was just and we did the Eileen McCahill came up with that, the Springwood Mustangs on the back.
I mean, Marianne's been involved with a lot of our movies, and we just, you know, we let her do her thing. I mean, she totally gets what these movies are. We always go back to her, and she sat down with Sam, and you know, before you know it, you're just being presented all these costumes. But it's all Marianne. I mean, she's coming up with this stuff. She studied the early films, and you know, she has her little touches all over the place.
We had to design the garden at Chris's because there was an important story point where Chris goes out and finds Freddie, and we built the whole thing there. And as we were doing it, as I was designing it, I showed the homeowners the drawings to see if they wanted to keep it. And at the time they were like, no, they didn't ambivalent. At first they did, then they decided they didn't in the end. And then once we built it, they were like, oh man, we should have kept it because they loved it so much. This is actually an old industrial building. It was a school, but it wasn't a school for kids at all. It was a school for, very close by is another one of our locations, which is Beast de Boer, which is an old steel factory, which is now being dismantled. And we found this by chance. And this actually was a school many years ago, now long since abandoned the last 10 years, where the apprentices used to come for the steel factory to go to school. So we didn't realise that at the time when we scouted, that was only later. But we had to do an extensive amount of work on the exterior and on the interior. This whole room is all fabricated, from the doors to the colour on all the walls, the flooring and everything else. For us, the whole point of this set is to try and make it as warm and cuddly as possible. So you have so there's a juxtaposition about what happens later. So that's kind of one of the starting points. And then actually from trying to find a location, we ended up visiting a bunch of different preschools, which also give you inspiration too.
I mean, there were kills from the original movie that we knew we wanted to take to the next level in this movie, and the Tina kill was the one that we knew we had to do. And it was amazing what they did in the first one, the way she's dragged across the ceiling and all that. So we sat around and talked like, all right, what can we do? We can't just drag her on the ceiling. That's what they did. So came up with the idea. We're going to fly her around the room a little bit. The stunt double and Katie went up in the harness also. They did amazing work. It's unbelievable.
Sam had some specific ideas about how to make it his own, how to make it more intense and just more terrifying. The direction I wanted to take with it from a storytelling perspective was to try my best and make Jesse, her boyfriend, believe that he was in a nightmare and make the audience think for a second, maybe we are as well. There were earlier drafts where he hints to Chris, he's like, I've been having nightmares about you as well, and in the nightmares, you're eviscerated and I can do nothing but stand and watch. We pulled back on that. You get the sense that that's what he's been going through. We don't necessarily have to spell it out, but to have him then go through that nightmare in reality lets you know that Freddy had been torturing all of them and planning a lot of stuff ahead of time.
Filming the death scene in Chris's bedroom was like nothing I've ever witnessed. You know, it was this woman they had. I mean, Katie did a lot of it herself when she first lifts off, and you know, it's so violent. It's so much worse than it ever was in the original. You know, and they literally had this woman with about, I don't know, 40 ropes coming out of her on this harness, and they're literally just throwing her from wall to wall. And she almost hit me many, many times. Like, there's a lot of shots where I'm ducking, but I really had to duck. I mean, it was crazy. And you sort of, this is a great thing about making films, is like you step in and it's so weird, and then you get used to it, and then you think about it later and you go, I was watching a woman be flung from wall to wall really hard, and she gets down and is like, that was awesome.
In a harness, and like this plate that goes on my front and on my back, so I'm like literally, feels like I have like rock hard abs, which is cool. And then they just like hang you wherever they want and like throw you around a room, and I'm like, wow, that was attractive. But you know, it was cool.
Because we're able to do things with visual effects of, like, you know, removing the wires in a far better way than they would have been able to do in the original movie, where they were very limited logistically or practically, and we don't have those limitations. So we're able to have many layers of this death as far as the coverage of the scene goes, just based on advances in technology, so we can be more violent with the slams into the wall. You know, making a movie is all about the cheat or whatever. It's, you know, how you establish something, build something up, and then when you're taking creative liberties or license with something and being very subtle with it, so that it never takes anyone out of the movie. The more you see Katie Cassidy fly around that room, the more believable it will be.
So here's what seems like a really old t-shirt, but as you can see, there's many of them. And this is Nancy's painting t-shirt. You know, we took, you know, when I used to paint, or when I paint, I still paint, I always just take my safety pins and pin it back so it doesn't fall forward. I put the big t-shirt on. And, you know, this is, you know, feathers. They have the crow and the bird in there. So hers is, and she has a bird on when she's in her necklace, which you can barely see, but it's in there. But this is all part of that. And so that's what she has on her shirt and her painting shirt. And then because Jesse might get blood on him, we need to have multiples.
Well, I do hate running, and I'm always running in jobs. It was crazy. It was like my first week of shooting, and when I got arrested, they're real Chicago police. So it was just, you know, knee in the back, and I mean, it was pretty. It felt very, very real, and it was all night long.
Eric Heiserer, who wrote the draft of the script that we all went crazy for, came up with the concept of micronaps. And a micronap is basically a waking dream or nightmare that will last for a second or two.
When we were looking at this character, it was very important that there be a freshness and a newness to him. It's also this character that you recognize and that you know, and that's why it was very important to kind of keep certain elements like the fedora.
We've definitely saved all the warmth really for the boiler room, you know, and we did keep things a little bit on the cooler side for the contrast. So we've kept things, and when things are lit in the pharmacy and in other places, lit things in a more blue way at time or a little bit green at times to really capture that sense of reality with the fluorescents that go green and stuff. And then once we get to the boiler room, it definitely sort of goes warm. So we did try to really play that contrast.
It felt like we were shooting in that boiler room for 8 months. I mean, it was that place just, it was so hot, and the air, I mean, it was really kind of exhausting, and we just did hours of me running and with him, and you know, I never thought I would be hung upside down in a movie. That was pretty intense. And they came to me about 5 minutes before we were gonna shoot it, and they went, so in the script it says you're hanging there, but we just realized that's gonna mean you're upside down. So fortunately I hadn't eaten too much. And then they just, you know, doused me in blood, and I kind of like being covered in blood. I think it's a good look. Like right now, I kind of like it.
I went back to the original design when we first started designing this, and I really dissected what they had tried to do with that and what they had done with it. And they did some really interesting things. I was wondering, you know, originally I think that they had tried to make him look like a male witch, which sort of explained what they had done with the nose, and I wondered about that, and it worked for the character, but I was curious about that. I was wondering if it was a decision made at the time because you couldn't get rid of the nose, which now we digitally could do if we wanted to. And I thought that that was an option that we were going to follow. I looked at all of the shapes that they had done, and I wanted to echo some of that with whatever it was that we did, but I really threw the designs all over the map because I looked at all of the things that you could potentially do with somebody when they got burned or when anything got burned. What was it going to be? Was it going to be healed burns? Was it going to be fresh burns? Was he still burning? Was he dried out burned? Was he a wet burn? Was he bloody burned? So I just started throwing, before we even got the job, I started throwing out all of these different concepts and actually brought Sam here. And we just went through my big library and we just started pulling out things that excited us, and books on mummies, books on actual burns, books on everything. We just laid them all out on the table and we started, throwing Post-it notes on even little tiny pieces that excited either of us, and that was really fun. And then when the job actually was awarded to us, I brought a couple other concept artists. And we just had a free-for-all, and we just traded designs back and forth. And they would throw things to me, I would throw things to them, and we just eventually really started to hone down on an alley that everybody loved. And then we went to clay, and we started refining the process there. We got one final design that everybody really was excited about. We took a life cast of Jackie, which is we put silicone all over his face, and we let that cure. And we put a mother mold of plaster bandage on top of it. We pull that off, and we make plaster positive. After we've got a plaster positive, we start sculpting in clay. We always knew that there was going to be a digital component to Freddy. We weren't exactly sure how extensive that was going to be. One of the things that Sam and I had talked about initially was the ears and the nose, because when anybody's burned really severely, those soft tissues really sort of are the most affected quickly. So we started with the idea of removing ears, removing noses, and we also thought that it would be really interesting that you didn't originally see very much of the digital wound when you're looking at Freddy, but when he would do things like open his mouth, you would see that the skin was so distressed and distorted that it would come apart and you would start to see things happening under the surface. So what I wanted to do is sort of do like a little bas relief and sort of suggest what that area looked like in 3D, even though it's just more flat than it would ultimately be. So in long shots, we could have things that we wouldn't have to have the digital replace. It would look like it looks, but then we could paint a green on the close-up so we can actually have some digital removal going on. So once we had the clay sketch going, then I sent pictures back and I said, well, what do you think of this? And everybody was in Chicago at this point, and I was here working on this back in my studio, and they started making corrections and comments, and they said, well, we really need to see it. Can you fly out here? And we were in a really compressed build schedule, and I said, okay. So we got a flight. I went on the flight with this big bust of Jackie Earle Haley with soft clay all over it, and I was just panicked that something was going to happen to this in transit. And we got there fine, but I almost didn't make it back. They almost didn't let me on the plane with it back, and days are ticking away, but ultimately I wound up flying to Chicago and back with it in the same day, and they took one look at it and they said, yeah, it looks great, and so that was it. We ultimately wound up making the entire Freddy Krueger makeup out of silicone, except for the fingertips, which were made out of a hard rubber, just so he could manipulate things. I didn't want to make any kind of decision too early in the process, because there are a lot of other materials that are really suited. We could have gone with foam latex. We could have gone with foam latex with overlays of plastics or vinyls or any of that kind of stuff. And there were times where I was really thinking about that. I mean, when we were going towards some of the more dry designs and the more flaky designs, we had designs where he had desiccated skin all over him and layers of all of that. And it almost looked like there was going to be a lot of post-construction happening. Ultimately, we used silicone. Jackie was great in the chair. It's tough for any actor going through that long of makeup, 3 hours in the morning and an hour at night to remove it. And knowing that you've got a full day to focus on. He would run lines, he would do all kinds of things. So we made best use of our time. We probably put Jackie into the Freddy makeup 30 times. We started out on the very first day, it was a 6-hour process. But it wasn't, 6 hours of just putting the makeup on. We were still exploring the design, we were still exploring the coloration, we were figuring out how the pieces went on, what order they best went on, just finding out how it worked with Jackie's face. After that, it was under 5 hours a second day, and then we got it down to just over 3 hours, 3:15, 3.5. But ultimately, by the very end, we got it down to 2 hours and 45 minutes.
I remember the glove. Everyone remembers the glove coming up between her legs. So, no problem. Nancy's gonna fall asleep in the bathtub, glove's gonna come up, knock at the door, glove goes away. Simple, right? Not simple at all. The guys who I love built the bathtub and did not take into account how the sweater and the glove fit on the hand and how you have to be waterproofed with rubber so the water doesn't come out the bottom when the hand is coming up. And for some reason we show up on the day and the guy puts the glove on and he can barely get the blades out of the water. And we're looking and we say, I got it, guys, we have to get the glove out. Sam, we're all looking at each other like the glove's coming out this much. And sure enough, we went around in the set and said, okay, who can fit in this glove? Who's got a hand that can fit in this glove? And who's got a really long arm? And we found a guy who had a really long arm, and he got under that tub, underneath the set, and finally we got it out of the water, which is what you see in the movie.
I think it was a PA who had a longer arm. We put the sweater on him because for us it was important to be able to see the sweater and the glove. And I guess that if I could have made that arm even longer, I would have liked to have been longer, but we couldn't find anyone. That was the longest arm on set that day.
It has to be in camera. There's no reason for it not to be. You think we're going to build a bathtub, we're going to cut a hole in the bottom, and all you have to do is stick your hand through it. Well, but it has to be waterproof because you got to keep she's in the tub with all the water. So, you build this, the hand comes through, then you put the glove on top of the hand once it's through, and you pull it under, and then you start doing the rotation back and forth, and it was a very difficult shot to get.
This is a little more art, so compared to some of the other fire and kind of the gore that we're doing, this is more of a dream sequence where Nancy is revealed into this location and it's a snowstorm. So this is kind of the early stages of us doing some snow dressing around while they're shooting inside. Just kind of get some of the fundamental stuff laid in, and then we'll start putting ice down and some foam and some other materials. This stuff is called, it's called Dream Cloud, or it's called Water Sculpt. There's different, it's polyester. Actually, you can kind of tear it in different directions and wet it, and you can contour it. So it's kind of helpful when you're trying to get it looking more natural. The other product is pretty much just a flat carpet, which doesn't have much character. You can add this to it. Sometimes it's critical if it's going to be close enough to camera, we just can go with ice because nothing else is going to look like it. But to the camera's eye, white is white, and it's that trick of your eye. It could be 3 different kind of materials. As long as they're white, you're believing it's all snow anyway. So it depends on the nature of how close we are to camera with it, whether it's interactive with the actors, if they have to walk in it, because this is not very good to walk in, where ice is like the way we have to go, or if it was some other material because it was going to melt too fast. So we'll see falling snow, but we're using another product called snow candles, which is more of like an ash type material, so it's very photogenic. It just floats well. It just looks like feathery snowflakes. So it's a premium product, but it's going to look great for this. And hopefully, as you get closer, you don't have to do like gigantic vistas of it. We've done a lot of big snow pictures as well, and you kind of take it for granted, make it look pretty, and then when it's looking right, you don't even pay attention. So that's what it had to look like. Anything less, it looks a little bit cheesy. So hopefully, we stay on this side of cheesy.
We wanted to do something different, and it was always, we always wanted to show a little history on him in the movie. Not too much, but definitely do a Fred Krueger flashback. Fred Krueger pre-burn, Freddy Krueger after the burn, and really see what those parents did to him on that day.
Well, the pre-burn Freddy is a little bit different to the burn Freddy, certainly, and the clothes sort of morph a little bit from what it was. It's definitely like a stylized version of it. You know, the dream world in general, I think all the way around, it's like we sort of try to hit that Freudian saying that everything you desire, experience, or see during the day is what you dream at night. So what we did always was we took images. I talked to the production designer, and he had a lot of great little images, and we took images from other movies, and then we'd pull them. It was actually made it fun for me. So it wasn't just about putting people in clothes and what are the multiples. It really, there was a lot of thought that went behind, for instance, color palettes. It's brighter, the clothes are brighter in the beginning, and then after Chris gets killed, both Nancy and Quentin go just into grays. And the world around them, you know, as much as we could control it, some scenes we couldn't control because the crowds were not ours, but, you know, we tried to make the colors get more and more muted, and they become this really gray palette, the two of them together. Swim team, for instance, all the girls and the guys, there's the red slashes on Quentin's swimsuit, and TYR was the company that does all the Olympic swimsuits, and they did our swimsuits for us. But there's, on the women's swimsuits, when you go to see them to dive in, they have basically red slashes on their black swimsuits. And so, and the colors of the school were red and black, fortunately for us, which was just perfect. So they really played on the red and green. And so that, I just love that, you know, that was just one of my, I thought that looked beautiful when they shot it.
Finding a location like that, if you can divorce the challenges that come with a location like this, you know, it's an amazing thing when you find something that supersedes what you are hoping to find.
In the screenplay, when Quentin goes swimming, he comes up in an abandoned factory, and that's all it basically said. So we started scouting abandoned factories all over Chicago within, 45 minutes of the city, driving everywhere. And we came across this steel factory, and it was one of those locations when you drive up and you're coming onto the property and you're like, where are we? And you don't really see anything because the property is so massive, and you keep going and you keep going, and finally you start seeing these buildings. You're like, what the hell is that? Oh, that used to be a steel factory. I mean, we knew instantly. I remember sitting down with the location manager on that day and saying, you have to lock this location. Sam looked at me like, I need to shoot here. I said, you need to shoot here. That's right, you do. And we locked it. I mean, we got lucky. It was just one of those things where we saw it and we got really lucky.
We were just really trying to find enough sets to make the audience interested, rather than just trying to find the whole thing in interiors. So to broaden the scale of the film, we found a steelworks we were working in, which is just around the corner, which is great. It just gives us a huge amount of scale. Again, a found location. And then we found really happy with where we found Elm Street. It took a lot of searching. It took us a long time to try and find just the kind of neighborhood we wanted. And finding that was kind of key. And from there, then we move on to stage. So then we have a lot of stuff that's built on stage. Some of the fantasy dream worlds, which is going to be fun. There's some tunnels and caves and this big kind of crazy room that's part of the nightmare.
So behind us is where Fred Krueger turns into Freddy Krueger. Fred will be completely engulfed in flame tonight.
In some cases, we'll be using the actor to do some of the fire. We'll put some fire on his arm and on his legs and make him dance around a bit. And overlap with the stuntman doing his full burns and you're getting blasted with the propane can. When you're fully engulfed, in this case, we have no hood in one of the burns. So if you were to scrape off the gel, the protective gel, as you're moving, you get burnt there. Things like that. Burning too long, waiting too long to tell us you're hot. When you're about to get hot, you're hot. You gotta go down and have someone put you out. Probably do a couple. I think we've got two. Look, there's a couple takes of the propane cannon where he won't ignite, so he'll just get blasted with a big ball of fire. And then we'll do the shots on the exterior where Freddy comes running out in a dead run, fully engulfed in flames.
When he's coming out of the factory and his face is on fire and there's that close-up of his face, I mean, and you really look at that frame by frame, his flesh is boiling and you can see the bubbling flesh, and there are places where his skin is getting redder and redder and then it just kind of turns to blood. I mean, intricate detail and tens of hundreds of hours of work to make that stuff look the way it looks.
This segment is related to the fire at the abandoned factory where Freddy initially gets burned. There's a couple beats in there where the fire's consuming around him. This will give us an insert of fire coming up around his feet.
The remake of Nightmare, just like Friday the 13th, felt like it would play in the real world. So it wasn't even an issue for us. So we said, this is a 2010 movie. And, we adapt with, communications and technology. And, you work those into your movie, which they did not have in 1984, which we all know in horror films made life much easier without cell phones. So now we have to deal with computers and cell phones. So that definitely did alter our story a little bit, because you can Google just about anything you want in the world right now. So you could type Freddy Krueger into a computer and learn anything you want about him. So that was definitely a challenge for us on how to tell this story, knowing that these kids have access to the internet and cell phones.
because the numbers that are on Quentin's final shirt, it was a play on the song, the 1-2, Freddie's Coming for You. And so we did numbers, and we did them, you know, reverse and forward. So if you, depending on how they shoot it, it'll always be sort of there. And that was kind of fun.
She designed Quentin's shirt. That was a shirt that she designed by herself and just said, this is what he's going to be wearing. And we loved it. And it feels so subtle that people might not even know that the numbers are on there or what it is, but obviously that's there for a reason.
I sat down with some of the producers and some of the people at New Line and Sam Baer as well, and all of us kind of powwowed. We got together and said, let's talk about like the hallmark, the iconic visuals from the original that we all adore. And we were going to jot all these things down. And I think we all ended up with almost identical lists of like, okay, these are images that if we can get them in this remake, we should. Not as a wink or like a, you know, breaking the fourth wall or anything, but as this is part of the Nightmare on Elm Street world, and we need to do it justice. The body bag was certainly one of them. It's one of our favorite images from the original in the school, and we wanted to find a place for it. And thankfully, I said we've got to make it in the school as well. We've got to, placing it anywhere else didn't necessarily do it justice. So we got Chris in the body bag, and she was amazing. Katie Cassidy did an amazing job with that.
The body bag was a moment that I think creeped everybody out. And it is amazing that in 2009, as simple as that gag is, it is so effective to just see a girl covered in blood in a clear bag, just standing there. And then, you know, taking it to the next level, which they did in '84, and having Freddie's voice come out of her mouth.
That was a tough day for me because I was covered in blood. I had this Barbie blonde wig on because the blood stains your hair. And so I was literally stuck in this bag for hours, and the blood like melts and sticks to you, and it turns into like this glue kind of, so, and the plastic was sticking to me, and it was crazy, but it was fun, and you gotta just laugh about it.
Decision to use motion control is really based on the kinds of effects we're doing, which is not the traditional sort of CG, because we're not creating background elements. It's all live elements.
It was an early thing that Sam had pitched us about melding the two worlds together. Taking the pharmacy and the boiler room and literally having her jump between the two rooms, actually dissolving between the two rooms. And he said, we have to use this motion control rig. I've never worked with motion control before. So sure enough, I walk out on the day and this Russian submarine is sitting in the pharmacy. And it's this motion control rig, this big black box. It's awkward and it takes up a lot of space, but let me tell you, when it works, it's amazing.
Because you have this fantastic device in the story, that allows you to transition between the dream world and the real world in an instant. The only way to really achieve that photographically was to do it within one shot. You can do it in an edit, but Sam, really wanted to push that and to make that happen in camera. And so that was where the decision to use motion control was, so that we could literally be moving down the aisle of the pharmacy, and without a cut, without anything, suddenly you're in the boiler room. And that's, truly terrifying. And that's where the motion control came from.
When we were looking at the concept of what his face looked like, we looked at some of his wardrobe options, and there was some ideas of trying to really elevate the sweater to something of its own and take it away from what the whole franchise was.
Glove's just your typical leather glove. We burned it, aged it to make it look like it was old and burned.
Pretty similar to what they had before, but it is still kind of re-engineered, definitely made from my hand. It's very articulating.
When we wrapped production, we were very happy with the makeup, and we would have been very content to have that be our Freddy Krueger. Andrew Clement did a fantastic job on his makeup, and he did exactly what we asked. It just seemed that in the post-process, when you saw what you were capable of doing, why not keep pushing? And we just kept going and going and going with it. And you know, that's why a little bit in the beginning of the movie you don't see him as much, and at the end we really saved it. Those amazing shots of his face for the very end there, where we really spent the time. And if you look on the Blu-ray and you freeze frame, you can see in there, and there are tendons moving when he speaks. I mean, it's very intricate.
During filming, we put the green dots on Jackie's face, and we always knew that left side of his face was going to be opened up. We had no idea what it was going to look like. Throughout the project, while you're filming the movie, you have no idea. It's just green on his face. There was no test done. We had no idea how deep it was going to be, what they were going to do. So you shoot the entire movie with the green on his face. You turn it over to the visual effects house, and then you start seeing tests from them on what they're going to do with the face. And then eventually you get to what you see today.
Jackie was very pleased, and he didn't know what it was going to be. And I had always been cryptic whenever people would say, well, what are you using the CGI for? Because I didn't want to say, well, Freddy Krueger's going to have a fully CGI'd face, which is not the case. But if I would have said that we're doing any CGI to his face, people would have assumed that it would have been a full redo, and that's not what we were trying to do. All we wanted to do was to make it look like he had been really damaged by that fire.
We knew that it's easy to remove the green from the face. So no matter what, we knew we could pretty much have what we shot with, which I thought looked good. So to me, it was just going to be a bonus of what the visual effects company could do. And sure enough, as I started seeing the progress of the shots, we became happier and happier.
If we would have had 2 more months, we would have worked up to the final day, because we worked up to the final day trying to perfect that face. Because for us, you know, those shots where, you know, a little bit of skin is in front of another actor and you can see it, or you can see through his face or see into his mouth, that stuff is cool to us, you know. I mean, we're fans, and to be able to see that made it feel better to us, and so we kept pushing and pushing and pushing on that.
Nancy was Freddie's favorite. Even as a child, she was a little bit different than the other kids, and because he's different than everyone else, he really connected with her.
In the screenplay, we had a sequence where Quentin falls asleep when he's sitting with Nancy, and the walls around him all fall, and he was supposed to be on some sort of a stage. And we started scouting in Chicago, and we heard of this old abandoned church that was in Gary, Indiana. So the pictures looked amazing. We took a drive down there, and I walked in there with Sam Baer, and we knew instantly that this was going to be the location for this sequence. And you can see here how amazing this location is. So then we just tailored the entire sequence to this location.
When the camera pushed in on Quentin and he had that paper cutter in his arm, the move went straight in, and then the walls fell away and revealed himself in a church, which didn't make sense because when the kids were getting stalked by Freddy, it was mostly in the boiler room. Even though it didn't make sense, we loved that location and we loved the way the scene felt. We loved it when we shot it. We thought it was going to be killer, but didn't seem to be at the end. The scene itself, we thought that it played a little bit slow. You have this scene that put a lot of emphasis on Quentin at a time when it was Nancy's story. And on top of that, we were concerned about showing Freddy Krueger not in his Freddy Krueger attire. And it just felt wrong. It just felt like a different movie. We all loved the scene as its own scene, but as it fit into the movie, or as we tried to fit that into the movie, it just didn't fit.
The giant Quentin head was really interesting. We took a life cast of Kyle. When you've got a tangible item like a life cast, you've got to find a way to actually swell the mold material. So we took a silicone mold of that and we put it in kerosene and we tried to swell that up so Jackie could fit inside. We had a positive, we made a mold of it, injected silicone and then put a zipper in it, painted it up, and we had an oversized Quentin head.
That scene was right adjacent to the church. Nancy goes to wake up Quentin and she's shaking him, and he kind of unzips and Freddy's there.
The Quentin unzipping gag, which we attempted to film while we were on location in Chicago, stemmed from an idea from the director Sam Baer, who had done an old Rolling Stones video that Angelina Jolie was in, where she unzips her face and she's underneath this prosthetic face that's covering her. It looked really cool. We talked about like, wow, that was years ago, what could we do now? And we built this head, and I'll never forget the day when they showed me the head for the first time, and it was literally 3 times the size of Kyle Gallner's head. And it's one of those things where you're like, how the hell is that gonna work? And I'm looking at this thing, it's huge. He's walking around by the trailers and there's got this big head over his head because he has to unzip it. So cameras, anything can happen. So we all smile about it. We're like, okay, I'll bring the big head in. We all make jokes about it. And sure enough, we do it, and he unzips, and with some visual effects, you shrink it down and you bring it to size with his shoulders and everything. But eventually when we looked at it, it didn't seem to work in the movie. The sequence with the cathedral we were removing that. So there really was no way to go to the chair where Quentin was sitting to have him unzip. So that sequence kind of naturally was lifted when the cathedral was lifted. But we gave it a shot, and let me tell you, it actually looked pretty cool. It was amazing how the big head, offset, what that looked like, and then when we actually saw it in the movie, it actually looked really good. In the deleted scenes, there's an alternate ending that you'll be able to see that we shot in Chicago. And the reason that's not in the movie is when the screenplay was developed, there was a great idea that came up where Nancy was going to be tied down in the bed in her dress, as you see in the movie, and she won't look at Freddy Krueger. His face is all burned. She will not stare at him. He looks down at her and says, basically, if you're not going to look at me, I can get rid of all this. I'm going to show you what I used to look like. And he takes his hat, he wipes it in front of his face, and becomes Fred Krueger. The entire rest of the movie then plays out with Fred Krueger and Nancy to the end. We thought it was amazing. We shot this ending of the movie. After looking at the film, we realized that we cannot end our movie with Fred Krueger. We have to end our movie with Freddy Krueger. Where's our villain? The whole movie is about this villain, Freddy Krueger.
In the original ending, Nancy hits him with a bat a couple of times, and then she catches him on fire. And we were concerned that that ending did not feel very compelling, and that our heroine was not killing the villain at her own hand. Throwing paint thinner on him and having him catch on fire did not feel like a satisfying enough ending for us. So we made the decision that we were going to go back, and we were really going to have a battle. And to do that, we brought in Brad Allen, who has worked with Jackie Chan for the last 15 years. And he's an amazing martial artist and an amazing fight coordinator and a great stuntman and a very hardworking guy. And he presented to us the previs that you see.
We decided that we were not going to take the makeup off him. We were going to keep him burned, and we were going to have these two fight it out at the end. We called Brad Allen, did amazing work on Kick-Ass, and had just finished Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, and said, Brad, you got 2 days. What can you give us? This is what we need. Freddie, Nancy, Quentin in this room. It's all yours. And Brad said, okay. And he flew in and he put a team together, and within 24 hours, he came over and showed us a video of what the sequence was going to look like, edited and fully acted out with his stunt doubles. We all looked at it. I think there was 1 or 2 little notes and said, you make those couple of changes, we're ready to shoot. And sure enough, if you watch that stunt video, it's pretty much exactly what's in the movie.
We all flipped because we never thought our movie could have stuff like that. And for some reason, the ending of the movie just didn't have the same energy that we were hoping that it would have. And it felt like by bringing Brad in and doing that fight sequence, we really were kind of goosing the end of the movie. We always knew we wanted to do the coda where the mother's pulled through the mirror, but we needed something really, action-packed to get you to the place where you kind of relax, and then you see it, and then you give it to them one last time.
We've never worked with a stunt previs before, where you actually see the whole scene acted out. I mean, it was an amazing thing to see. I mean, it's all right there. They use cardboard boxes for the walls, and there's like a stunt pad for a bed, but we know the location, so it's so easy to see it. And luckily, they put a red and green sweater on the guy playing Freddy, and then you've got the girl playing Nancy and the guy playing Quentin, and you can see it all so clearly, and you don't have to, it's not like looking at storyboards or drawings. The whole thing is acted out. They shoot it and edit it with different shots, so you can actually see what he's thinking.
At the end of the day, we just wanted to give an audience something that they hadn't seen in any part of the movie, where you're seeing your characters being very proactive and really going after each other because everyone's been through a lot, and that's the final death fight. And I was very happy with the way it came out.
You tell the guy you have 3 people to throw in this room, and at the end, Freddy has to die. What do you got? I mean, and he literally put that whole thing together in 24 hours.